Welcome everybody to this very special Edinburgh Jewish Cultural Centre live session with our very dear friend Fiona Frank. And I'm just going to give a brief introduction and then hand over to Fiona because I know she has an awful lot of fantastic material to cover. So Fiona was born in the small Jewish community of Preston with a mother from London and a father from Glasgow. She has a degree in French and Italian from Bath University, and she completed her PhD in 2012 through the Centre for Oral History at Strathclyde University. The resulting book, called Candles, Conversions and Class, 5 Generations of a Scottish Jewish Family, was the subject of an EJCC live session in 2021. This led to 9 years with SCoJeC, which is now known as the Jewish Council of Scotland, leading their projects and outreach work throughout Scotland in many innovative ways. She is much missed in that role since her retirement in 2021, though we have a worthy successor in Sydney Switzer, who is either coming in tonight or will watch the recording later. Retirement didn't mean a rest for Fiona. She spent 2022 running international Zoom climate conferences and Klezmer music events, as well as being Secretary of Lancaster and Lakes Jewish Community and their Board of Deputies rep. She also promotes the work of her aunt, Glasgow artist Fiona Frank, who we've already mentioned, and she will be telling us more about this in a further event on 16th of June. Fiona has been a great friend to EJCC since its first inception over a decade ago, working with us with her usual passion and enthusiasm. She very much embodies EJCC's values of sharing Jewish culture far and wide with everyone, whatever their background or belief. I followed her 14-month travels through the Americas on Facebook with absolute fascination, taking in her passion for the environment, music, her Jewish identity, and so much more. I was therefore delighted when Fiona accepted our invitation to present a series of themed events about her amazing trip, of which this is the first. So without further ado, I hand over to Fiona Frank.
Woo. Thank you, Janet. And thank you for having me here. So I'm going to start off by saying I'm really nervous, and that usually cures it. So we'll see if it cures it this time. I'm going to start sharing a map. This is where I went, and I tried to not fly as much as possible. I was originally going to do 6 months in South America. I was interested in going to South America because in 2022 I got involved with helping to run an Amazon festival in Lancaster after the British environmental journalist Dom Phillips, whose sister Sian is here in my audience here, was killed along with Bruno Pereira, his Indigenous expert colleague, and he was researching a book about the Amazon, and I helped to try and organize a festival here, and I really wanted to go to the Amazon to find out more. And in fact, Dom's book's going to be published next month, and it seems a long time later, but that I met anyway. That was one reason why I wanted to go to the Amazon. I wanted to go to Brazil to meet. 40 years ago, I went to Peruvian Amazonia, and I met an anthropologist there who I had a bit of a, I was involved with him over a 27-year period off and on. So I wanted to go back to Peruvian Amazonia as well. And I'm just looking for the annotation tools, and oh, we don't have them. That's interesting. I wanted to go to, I ended up going for a year because my daughter had moved to Los Angeles, so I decided to rent my house out for a year and not 6 months. And I went to visit her in Los Angeles on the West Coast here. I then went up to Vancouver and went all the way across Canada on a train down to Toronto for a 4-day train journey. The little X's, I booked in to go to the Canada Festival in Montreal, where I saw Michael Alpert, and the Yiddish New York Klezmer Festival in New York, where I also met Michael Alpert. And there's another little X on the right hand side there, which is that I was absolutely determined while I was in Canada to go and visit Prince Edward Island, where a distant relative of mine had made a fortune in fox fur 100 years ago, and there was a park named after him, and I wanted to have my photo taken at the Dr. Leo Frank Park. So I set off on a ship going down from Tenerife to Brazil, and I came back on the Queen Mary 2 from New York to Southampton. And the only bit that I did on the plane, apart from a little bit in Peruvian Amazonia, was from northern Brazil to southern California. So I did pretty well there. And there's a lot of sunsets in this tour, and this is sunset from the ship going out there. The ship that I went on was a digital nomad cruise. I was trying to find a cargo ship. It turned out they weren't doing cargo ships after the pandemic, and this was the best that I could do not flying. And it was a conference of 400 digital nomads who were on the ship, doing all sorts of presentations about different things. I took my captain's table dress, so that in case I needed to look smart anytime over the time, but mainly I was just in t-shirts and shorts the rest of the 14 months. And we all had to do something. We all had to present something while we were on the trip. So I did the presentation of the For Don Bruno in the Amazon exhibition, which we'd done in Lancaster, and I took it with me and presented it to a group of people on the ship. And then I promised you, I think if some of you will have seen the blurb, I promised you some carved fruit. So you get these wonderful, amazing carved fruit displays on cruises. So I couldn't stop photographing them. They're absolutely amazing. And then another thing that I did while I was on the ship was got interested in the art, which was actually a theme for my whole 14 months. And I did a little tour for everybody else of the art on the ship. It was a Italian ship, Costa Diamantino or something. And they had commissioned, I think, about 50 Italian artists to make new work for this ship. It was really interesting. And here's the last sunset on the ship. That's my friend Agnieszka, who I traveled with a little bit at the beginning of the tour and a little bit in the summer in Peru. On the ship, it was Hanukkah, and I was trying to keep quite low key about being Jewish. It was November 2023, so not a great time. And I had a look down, and I wanted to light Hanukkah candles, which I'd carried with me, and I was thinking, well, how can I find the Jews? So I found the Israelis on the list of people that were on the tour and on the digital nomad trip. And we had this thing of 3 or 4 of us trying to light Hanukkah candles outside on deck with the wind whooshing over from the sea, because we weren't allowed to light candles in the ship. But that was the first time of trying to be Jewish on this whole tour. And then we arrived in Salvador. I'd persuaded my niece to come with me for the first 6 weeks because I was feeling quite nervous about setting off and doing solo travel. And I hadn't been to Brazil before. I'd been studying Portuguese for 6 months, but it wasn't great. And she'd lived there for a year, 8 years earlier. So I brought her with me in the mistaken belief that her Portuguese was better than mine. And also just to have somebody with me for the first while, which was great. So we arrived in Pelourinho. Pelourinho is the old city of Salvador, and these ladies, they're called Baianas, women of Bahia, and they're made. I'm going to stop my sharing because I forgot to put the sound on. I knew that would happen. Let's do it now with the sound. These women are called Baianas. They're wearing the clothes that the enslaved women from West Africa wore, and those enslaved women were able to sell traditional foods from Africa, acarajé, which is made of ground black-eyed peas and shrimps. They specially made me some without the shrimps, and vatapá, ground peanuts with coconuts. And they were able to sell that food to buy their freedom from slavery. And the Baianas now do these sorts of dancing, and they still sell that food in the street. And the whole of Pelourinho, the area where I was living was basically full of this kind of color and noise and sound and Afro-Brazilian food and music. And I have to apologize. I had two phones, an iPhone that did good sound that I kept in the house, and a TerraCube that did absolutely terrible sound that I took out with me, because you get your phone stolen in Brazil, and I didn't want my iPhone stealing. So I didn't have, so at first we've got absolute rubbish sound in my recordings, but at least you get the idea about the colors. Pelourinho is the name of the old city of the old part of Salvador, and Janet's cousin who lives in Brazil will know that that means whipping post. And so we know where the site of the whipping post was for the enslaved people. So like right in the middle of the old city, every day you're reminded of its history by the name of the old city. And we're going to talk a little bit about more about Afro-Brazilian history. Apart from the music and the sounds and the culture and the music and the sounds and the food and the language, the other thing that Brazil was really full of, of Salvador, is sunsets. So when we weren't getting drumming from morning till night, we were going out, everybody runs to the sunset areas. There's 3 or 4 places that everybody goes. This is in Baja, which is a beach area. And for the sunsets, you'd get people selling beer, and somebody came and played guitar sometimes. And there was one night when it was such a good sunset that people applauded it. And there was just, I love Brazil for how much they love sunsets. Then we're on to Afro-Brazilian history. This is Zumbi. Zumi was born a free man. He's in a Quilombolo community called Palmares. Quilombolos were communities of freed slaves, people who had escaped and had set up perfectly legal communities of runaway. They were called runaway slaves, and they had communities. And the Portuguese, who were ruling Brazil at the time, offered all the Quilombolo communities freedom in return for them pledging allegiance to the Portuguese. And Zumbi led a mutiny. He did not want to pledge allegiance to the Portuguese while they were still enslaved people in Brazil, and he managed to. Obviously, the Portuguese rose up against him, but he led a mutiny, and he was able to stay free for another 9 years. And he was killed on November the 20th in 1695, 325 or so years ago, 1695. And November the 20th these days is the day of Black liberation in Brazil, and it's called Zumbi Day, and it's now a national holiday when people think about these issues. And what we were pointed out by the lovely woman who led my Black liberation tour, Black Afro-Brazilian tour, was that look at him. What is it? This is the only Black person that has got a statue in Pelourinho, and he's naked. So she felt it was a really demeaning statue, and that we needed to notice that. So this is the lady in the yellow dress is the woman who did the Afro-Brazilian tour. She's called Sayuri, and she took us to this museum where we saw a beautiful set of panels of Yoruba orishas. And these are African gods who were brought over to Brazil with the enslaved people. And I've got the numbers here, it's pretty amazing. There was something like 5.5 million Africans brought into Brazil mainly through Salvador and some of the northern ports. And a lot of influence, like I've said, about language and food and art and culture and music and rhythms and colors, but also these Yoruba orishas, they're part of African culture. So each one of them has a name and characteristics. And although Candomblé, the religion that they brought, was illegal till pretty much the 1970s, it was carried into Brazilian society. there's a thing called syncretism that I hadn't heard of before. Syncretism, and that is, it pretty much means hiding your candomblé inside Catholicism. So each of the Catholic gods, each of the Catholic saints, like pretty much every Brazilian knows that Santa Barbara is Yansan, for example, who's one of the orishas. And it has a lot of resonances with the Jews who escaped, who I'm going to come to in a minute, the Jews who arrived in Brazil in the 1600s, escaping from Portugal and Spain from the Inquisition, who were called New Christians, and they were hiding their Judaism, but still carried on very much doing it in private. So fascinating sort of stories. And then this was my landlady, Creuser, our first landlady in our first Airbnb. And she was, she'd lived in France for many years. And she was one of these baianas. So this was her niece who was dressing her up as a baiana in the house before she went out to do one of the ceremonies that they were doing. And then I went off, I left Salvador for a while and went up to Lençóis. And this is Artur Soar, who is a Brazilian artist who spent a week living in my house in December 2023. And while he was there, he got totally inspired by my aunt's art. So the picture that he is holding is an engraving that he did of my aunt from a photograph, surrounded by some of the images from her art. And this was at an art exhibition in his mother's gallery in Lençóis, or his and his mother's gallery in Lençóis. So I went up there. We're going to hear about this, like we said, in June. So if you can post the link to that in the chat now, and maybe the link to my aunt's art to the website too. While I was in Lençóis, we went off on 3-day treks and did all kinds of things, but I haven't got time to do all that because otherwise I'll never get to Canada and America. But here's one little tiny picture of a waterfall to whet your appetite. Then I came back to Salvador and was lucky enough to meet with Alessandra Sampaio, who's Don Phillips's widow. And it was really moving to meet her. And she talked about how she was setting up the Dom Phillips Institute. And this is really getting going now. And she's actually going to be coming to London and the Hay Book Festival and Lancaster in May and June to talk about the launch of Dom's book. So it was really lovely to have met her while I was in Brazil. It was one of the really big things that I did there. Then I spent 3 weeks in a language school. And as part of the language school, as well as learning the language, we also learned quite a lot about the culture. So the teacher there on the right-hand side was teaching us to cook vatapá and acarajé. And she was one of the, her family was from a long candomblé tradition. And she talked about how this food is given as offerings. So it's sacred food as well as being eaten on certain times. So it was absolutely fascinating. And there's the food. And then I realized that it was time to reach out to the Jewish community. My niece had gone. I hadn't had, I think every single other, I'll go back here for a moment. Every single other trip that I'd ever been on, anywhere, on ships and in hostels, anything, if it's a Friday night, I make challah and I bring together whoever's around, Jews and non-Jews, light candles, talk about community and being Jewish, and do wine and challah and candles. And I hadn't been feeling like wanting to be publicly Jewish at that time in Brazil. So I felt I wanted to reach out to the Jewish community. And the first thing that was going on was the Holocaust Memorial Day at the end of January. And during that event, they played this absolutely beautiful film. And it's only 2 minutes, so I'm going to share it now.
Meu nome é Ruth Sprung Tarassante, eu tenho 89 anos e sou sobrevivente do Holocausto. Já tinha 17 anos, eu era bonitinha, e quando andava na rua, os homens faziam gracejos comigo, mas quando eles souberam a minha origem, eles achavam que era alguma coisa perigosa. Quando me via, atravessava a rua Eu larguei a escola porque eu sofria muito bullying, tanto dos colegas como de outras pessoas da escola. Para mim foi terrível. À medida que eu fui assumindo a minha identidade, a intolerância foi crescendo. Na verdade, essa história não é minha. É de uma menina baiana indígena e o nome dela é Nayá Tupinambá. Verdade? Onde ela está? Ai, que linda! Que linda que você é! Você é forte.
Eu tenho muito orgulho de ter ouvido a chamada dos meus ancestrais e ter tido a força de poder me declarar enquanto indígena.
Não pode esquecer e tem que lembrar.
Dona Ruth, para mim, foi um símbolo de força enorme ouvindo a história dela. Como eu ouvia da minha avó e também da minha bisavó e das mulheres que vieram atrás de mim. Contar para não esquecer, para a gente ressignificar, também para a gente poder construir novas histórias.
Manter a história viva é lutar contra o ódio. Ontem, hoje, amanhã. Viver para contar. Contar para viver.
And I was really moved by this film. It had resonances with a film that had been made by the Scottish Refugee Council maybe about 6 years ago with Rosa Sakharin, who was the librarian at the Scottish Jewish Archive Centre, saying the words of a young Ugandan refugee. Exactly the same story 70 years later. And I just thought it was really beautiful. I then went back to my language school and I was telling them about what I'd been to see. I was trying to tell the story in Portuguese. And the teacher said, "We never learn from the past," which was a very beautiful thing for her to say. But I thought she was saying that I hadn't learnt my past tenses correctly at first. And then I worked out what she was saying. Okay, so here we are back in Salvador and looking at Carnival. And so much in Carnival had African links that you could see. It was just so interesting. And then there was also some stuff about, I'm going to go back a little bit. Lots of African links here in Carnival. And I wasn't just watching it, I was also dressed up as it. If you dress up in Carnival costume, then you can walk in the blocos behind the bands and you don't have to like this. You can buy this stuff and the money that you pay to buy it not only pays for the beautifully designed costume, but also goes to cover community groups, community projects run by the band. And then you don't have to go in this terrible atmosphere. It's actually quite fun, but it's even nicer to not have to walk. It's called pipoko, it's called that you're in popcorn, you're just jumping around with all these people, but not having to do that. You can walk in these costumes and just walk relaxedly behind the bands, and there's men holding you in with rope. So just a little bit more of the costumes. Here's a man playing the melodeon. I was very excited to see the man playing the melodeon because that's my instrument, so we'll come to that in a minute. I went along to the shul in Salvador and I obviously couldn't take photos inside. But when I got there, it was just like you go 7,000 miles and you find family, and it's a different language, but the same prayers and the same songs and the same food and the same welcome. And mainly Ashkenazi in Salvador. They're mainly Sephardi around in the north where I went later on for Pesach. But they were telling me all sorts of stories about hidden Judaism. So, for example, there's a legend in Brazil that loads of Brazilians know that you shouldn't point to the stars because you'll get a wart. Strangest story. And they said that it was because when the new Christians or the secret Jews were in Brazil, they were practicing Judaism in the house secretly, and they would send their children out to go and see whether there were two stars in the sky, so you could finish Shabbat on Saturday night. But you didn't want your kids to be pointing to you didn't want anybody to know that you were Jewish, so you didn't want the kids to be pointing to the stars, but you wouldn't want to tell them why. So they made up this story, and now it's it's in the whole of Brazilian culture. So who knows if that's true. Then I went on a little side trip to Cachoeira, and I'm going to just briefly talk about this. I met this lovely guide through the Afro-Brazilian guide, and he came and met me off the bus, and it was meeting him that led me to make these 5 rules for the older single woman traveller, which I have lived by, and everyone can have them. In a new town, always get someone to meet you. That's how I met so many Jews, because I just pulled, in any new town that I went to, I just pulled in any contacts that I could. So couch surfers or servas or friends of friends or musicians, and also Jews. And people are really happy to meet foreigners traveling. Never refuse an invitation. Don't make firm plans. You always want to change them because of rule 2, never refuse an invitation, and do something cultural every day. And then just for me, for my body type, if I hadn't kept to this one, I would have swelled up like an absolute balloon. So I just only had puddings on Thursdays, and I only drank if somebody offered it to me, and not even then sometimes. But this served me very well, and I give you my rules. So anyway, I asked the lovely melodeon player to teach me for whole rhythms, and then I ended up never refused an invitation, so I got invited to be in his band the following weekend. So I was actually in a band, and I'd like you to look at the hat on the top right, which is a wide hat with fringes, little fringe things on the right hand side. And then I'd like to show you the hat in this next picture. There you go, you can see it much better on this little kid. And this is another story, which is that the Brazilian Jewish community that I met in Salvador said that this hat, which everybody in the northeast of Brazil wears, is basically a little Jewish hat. It's got stars of David and it's got little peyot on the right hand side on the side here. And none of the northeastern cowboys that wear it think it's got anything to do with Jews, and all the Jews say it's got everything to do with Jews. So who knows? Then I went to Recife, which is the city where the first Jewish community in the south of Brazil was set up. And there's another link, Janet, to post in the chat about the history of Jews arriving in Recife. I'm not going to tell the story. They came early on. They were escaping from, as I said before, they were escaping from the Inquisition. And during the time when the Dutch were ruling Brazil, they were able to freely be Jewish, and they set up a Jewish community in a synagogue. And they sent this question to their home state rabbi, which is, what should we do about the seasons? These were the first Jews to ever live in the southern hemisphere, and the months didn't quite work out. So I don't know what the answer was, but that was the question, which they've still got the letter that went. And then there were some lovely posters. This is a picture of the original synagogue. This is a picture of Yiddish theatre going on in the 20s and 30s, and a beautiful song, which I'm sure Michael could sing for us at some point, but I'm not going to ask you to do that now. And then my lovely couch surfing host took me to Olinda. Couch surfing is a fantastic thing. You just go and make a connection with absolutely anybody. And Christiane turned out to be not only a really lovely person, I ended up staying extra days there and she took me all over, but also she was learning Hebrew, really interested in the Jewish community, and came with me on a Jewish tour of Olinda. And this is the guy who took us on the Jewish tour, and he reckoned that this was the mikveh, which is now in a place where they have these big carnival heads. So I didn't take many pictures of the tour, but this was one part of it. So there you go. I stopped off in San Luis. I was on my way from Fortaleza to Belém and down the Amazon. I got invited to go and stay in San Luis and never refused an invitation. It was hardly out of the way. And by Brasilena, who was one of the Jewish community of Salvador. and she took me to meet this Russian family. He was an artist, and I hardly knew where to put myself because there were naked pictures of the entire family all around the walls, including the one at the bottom there. And the woman on the left, Maria, was a folk dancer, and I said, "Oh, can I go and see your folk dance?" So then this happened. And I got absolutely hooked. I got absolutely hooked on this dancing. I ended up staying in San Luis for a month. I went back in June for their festival. I was only meant to be staying there for a week. It was so exciting. I even tried to get a grant to get them to come to a folk festival in England. We didn't get this £50,000 from the British Council, but hopefully I'll be doing some projects with them later in this year. Just so exciting to meet these people. And I wasn't even going to San Luis, and I ended up getting totally hooked on this sort of dancing. It's called Kakuria. It makes me very excited, and you'll see maybe more of it later. As I said, I hadn't been being very publicly Jewish, so it was very nice staying at Brasilena's house, and I finally managed to cook my first challah in South America. And then I promised you some tropical fruit. Here's some tropical fruit. I'm not going to name it. I promised you some journeys and some rivers. There was lots of journeys down the Amazon at this point, getting to Belém. This is how you have to sleep in a boat going down the Amazon. An older friend of mine very kindly told me that that at our age we deserved to get a cabin. So I actually did pay for myself to get a cabin, but this is how everyone else slept, and I certainly slept in the hammocks during the daytime. Such a nice way to travel. And then I got to Santarém, and in Santarém I did a Seder with the Sephardis, and they gave me, I'll just stop sharing so I can show you. They gave me this very lovely Haggadah, which they inscribed for me. And it was so nice to be a Haggadah for the Moroccan Jews. And it was so nice to be there. Another time when I just felt like I was at home. I'd gone 7,000 miles, and here you are with the matzah and the chrein and the hard-boiled egg and everything, just like being at home, except that it was Sephardi, so I got to eat rice for the rest of the week, which I haven't done before. That was good because that's what you eat in Brazil. It was just lovely to be at home there. Lots more sunsets and rivers. I feel I should show you the opera house in Manaus, the Italian opera house in Manaus. It's so striking and wild to see it. More rivers. And then I got to Iquitos, which is the next Jewish thing. And that was, there's a Jewish section of the cemetery. And then there was this very strange building, which is now a supermarket. And it had these tiles on the outside, and it was built for the Moroccan Jews that arrived, built in 1906, I think, for the Moroccan Jews that arrived in Iquitos in Peru. And it was Cohen's, and now it's a supermarket. But they've kept the tiles, and they've called it here it's a patrimony. It's what do you call it? Heritage of the nation. And then lots more rivers. I did get back to the indigenous village that I'd first been to 40 years ago. I was welcomed back as godmother, and I've now inherited Pete's 5 indigenous godchildren. And this is more journeys on the boats going down the Amazon. This is called the meeting of the waters, when 2 rivers meet just outside Santarém. It's very interesting. Then we arrived. Where are we now? This is, I think, back in San Luis. And here's Maria, the Russian dancer. And this is I'm just going to show you a little bit. So it was such a fantastic group to be part of. I'm going to quickly arrive in Canada and hopefully get to America by the end of the night. So in Western Canada, in Vancouver, there was an art show, and I started taking photos of these Indigenous carvings. I was trying to get in touch with First Nations and Indigenous people everywhere I went, and I met this guy, and his name is Hualactun Rick Harry, and I then went to Squamish, and just by chance I took a photograph of this sculpture, and it turns out it was a sculpture by James Harry, who's the son of the guy that I'd met, taken photos of in the previous place. So it was just really, I kept finding these connections everywhere I went. It didn't seem to be coincidental. So here we are at Lake Louise. I feel you should see Lake Louise. It's worth seeing. This is Lake Louise. This is my friend Freya, who came from my village to spend a month with me. And we played music on the 4-day train from Ontario, from Edmonton to Toronto. There we are, playing music on the train. And because nobody had anything else to do, it was really cool. You can actually get a job playing music on those 4-day trains, and you can get a free ticket, but only if you book it way in advance. And we had paid for our ticket, but we were very happy to play anyway. So art in Ontario, Indigenous art in Ontario, obligatory visit to the Niagara Falls. And here we have, we're in Klezmer, Canada. So that's Michael Alpert, who's present today. It was so lovely to meet him from Scotland when I arrived in Klezmer, Canada. And I've got lots of videos of the dancing and the music from Klezmer, Canada that I'm just, this is the backward march that they do every year there. It's a very strange tradition that apparently comes from an old shtetl tradition. Then I went to Toronto and I met and I stayed with Judith Cohen. I went back to Toronto and I stayed with Judith Cohen, who's the back of her head you can see here. She's a Sephardi singer and ethnomusicologist and knows everything about the history of Sephardi songs in Brazil. And we introduced each other to lots of people in Brazil. And she took me to a Jewish storytelling event. And I was just going to watch, but I couldn't hold back. And I ended up going, telling a story, going back a month later, telling another story, which I won't tell now because we haven't got time, but it was so nice to share this evening with them. And then one of the reasons that I was traveling was it was my 70th birthday, and my niece and my sister and my ex-husband and my daughter came over to meet me in Montreal, and we went up on top of the hill and had a lovely day out for my birthday. And they stayed for a week, and we did lots of tourism. And then I spent, and this is me wearing my posh dress again for my birthday dinner. And then we went on a Jewish tour of Montreal, and we saw, this is the Bag Street Shul, which was a converted block of flats that was converted into a synagogue in the 1920s, and it's the only remaining shul in that area. What else have we got here? Schwartz's Deli. We've got, this is a photo display they've got in Montreal of the 1920s Ashkenazi Jewish immigrants. And this is the special combo, Schwartz's menu. And then I found this nice book in the library because my landlady in Montreal, I was offered an extra month to stay in Montreal and was hanging around, and she was asking me about what I knew about the local community. So discovering Montreal Yiddish, and they were talking about how it's not a dead language because you can hear it absolutely everywhere. And we'll be hearing it sung in a minute. There was all sorts of challah around in Montreal, no need to cook any, no need to bake any, because there were the shops. And then there was then every week on a Monday afternoon, there was like the glitterati of Montreal Klezmer and visiting people like Jack Falk, who was here, and he was singing a Yiddish song, and he was talking about how there were all these Yiddish speaking people outside and they don't know each other. They're like they're two different worlds. So Yiddish songs going on inside the bar with this sort of music, and then outside, I went for a little tour to try and find a 5785 number. They have very high street numbers so that I could post it on my Facebook at the beginning of New Year. And around this area, there happened to be these guys walking around. So these are the sorts of people that speak Yiddish in Montreal, and they don't. It's like they're completely different worlds to the Yiddish singers in the bars. Very interesting. And then there was a 7th of October memorial event with 3,000 people in a tent, and coming from a tiny Jewish community of Preston with 40 people, it was just, I've never been together with so many Jews. And then I kept going back to the weekly event. With Josh Dolgan playing. You could just go and sit around here every Monday afternoon. It's so nice. And this guy is playing klezmer music, but doing something French Canadian with his feet. And somebody over on the left is doing that Québécois thing with his feet as well. So he was my music teacher at Klez Canada, and he was teaching me klezmer music, but he also gave me lots of intros to French Canadian life. I went and had a cup of tea with Josh Dolgan, and he showed me his books, the books that he was using to teach his Jewish music class in the university. So if anybody wants a copy of his library, here it is. Montreal in Montreal. Oh no, I then went down to Nova Scotia. This was Halifax, Nova Scotia, more kosher meat, more kosher food, and more Indigenous art, and a bear. I went for a little walk in Cape Breton Island, Nova Scotia. And Nova Scotia is exactly what it says on the tin because of this. So it really knocked me out. People were singing in Scots Gaelic and this sort of signs. And I just felt very ill-educated because I had to be told it's because of the 20,000 refugees from the clearances that ended up there. That's what it's about. It's not some romantic thing. Very interesting. Then I went to Prince Edward Island, and I met this lovely guy who was Joseph, completely forgotten his name, a lovely guy who had done some research on the Jewish community in Montreal, and in Prince Edward Island, including my distant relative, Dr. Leo Frank. It's the same name as my dad. And there's a park named after him because he had this large piece of land, was his fox fur farm 100 years ago. And that was the vista from his fox fur park. Moorhaller, I think I made that one. The best museum that I went to was the history of Canada in Ottawa, the very best museum for the First Nations experience. And then I had a little side trip down from New York to New Orleans, but I met somebody who said I needed to go to Lafayette for the music, so I went to Lafayette for the music. There you go. And I was having a really lovely time in Lafayette, and I went to the tiny Lafayette Jewish synagogue on the Friday night, and there were 3 of us in the congregation, 1 person leading the service and 1 person outside doing security. That's so 5 in the whole building. It was really lovely. And the 2 Americans, the 2 New Yorkers gave me a lift home, dropped me back at where I was staying, went off. I didn't have their details. I'd left my coat in their car. It was a Friday night, but luckily it was reform, so I was able to phone, and I didn't have anybody's contact details, but I phoned somebody through Facebook, and I said, oh, it's these people, but I don't know their name. And anyway, the guy that I phoned knew their son, and through Jewish geography, they came back and delivered my coat, and everything ended happily. Some of you will know the lovely Vivian, who invited me to go and stay with her in Long Island. She's from Glasgow. This is Long Island. And I just wanted to quickly whiz through. This is the Yiddish New York. It was in a Jewish cultural center. This is a Statue of Liberty at Hanukkah, which was lit by President Obama in 2012 when it was first made. And lots more traditional historic Hanukkahs, lots more dancing. Michael Alpert was there too. And I just wanted to finish with this amazing thing in New York, where this is in the youth hostel. This is in the Metropolitan Museum. It's the Mishnah Torah of Maimonides, Italian paintings from the 11th to the 12th century. Woo! And then there's the Rothschild Master Prayer Book from 1490. Just wild things to see. And then I'm going to whiz through. Everywhere you look, there's that's not a Hanukkah. Everywhere you look, there's a Hanukkah. That's my cousins, more Hanukkahs. I went to swim in the sea on New Year's Day in Coney Island, and there's a Happy Hanukkah sign from the Chabad people. Wild, you don't get that in Preston. There's me swimming in the sea in Coney Island, another Hanukkah in my cousin's flats. And we got on the Queen Mary 2, and there was a bottle of champagne to greet us. And they made challah, and they had a room for the Jews to go in on Shabbat. And there's me in my trusty dress. This was the 4th time that I wore it in the whole year on the ship. And sunrise arriving in Southampton. And that's my 14 months.
Fiona, thank you. That's absolutely amazing. Whistle-stop tour through your 14 months of travels. And I have to say that I followed your travels on Facebook with fascination as somebody who really likes to stay at home, but enjoys learning about new things. So I traveled vicariously through you. And thank you. It's absolutely wonderful, wonderful talk.